Members of the House who are here in the Crossfire tonight, Maryland Democrat Donna Edwards and Iowa Republican Steve King. Congressman King, we've now been warned that a downgrade is possible. This is the first speaker, if this happens, this will be the first speaker to see 2 downgrades on his watch. What in the world is going on in the House of Representatives? Has he lost total control of his caucus?
Well, of course, if this happened, it would be the first president to have that happen as well.
Well, I think that they're pointing at Congress on this, just as they did last time.
We heard this, though, the last time. We raised the debt ceiling, and we were downgraded after we raised the debt ceiling, not before. And so I would argue that if you demonstrate fiscal responsibility, you're going to get a better credit rating. They lowered our debt credit rating. Excuse me. I would argue that you get a better credit rating if you show fiscal responsibility than if you do not.
And do you get that by denying staffers their health care? Is that what you get? You get fiscal responsibility by telling congressional staffers?
That hasn't been my plan from the beginning, and that semes to me that there are some people that think if we can just get that, if we can just deny our staff their benefits that we hired them with, that's going to be an accomplishment that's worth all of this. And I would say it's not. It is a bitter pill. So
are you going to vote no on the deal that's sitting before the House right now?
I want to see the language, but right now I'm leaning no. And I don't want to pull the rug out from underneath other people. I think we should see the language that they bring forward, and it seems to be up in the air. It's a jump ball right now.
Let me ask you, Congresswoman Edwards, not yet having seen the language and noticing that they're continuing to rewrite it, doesn't it strike you as premature for former Speaker Pelosi, in effect, to say not a single Democrat will even consider voting for this? I mean, do you think the minds are that closed, or do you think some people will look at whether or not there's something that could get a bipartisan vote?
It's not that. I think the vast majority of our caucus really believes, as the president does, is that you don't negotiate over paying your bills on time and keeping the government running. I mean, these are basic constitutional responsibilities that the Congress has, and I think that Republicans are being incredibly irresponsible here. And the idea, and I've heard Mr. King say this, that it doesn't really matter if we default on our obligations, that somehow not lifting the debt ceiling is, I mean, you portray it as though it's not a big deal. It's a really big deal. And I think what Fitch has done is it sent a warning to us, the shot across the bow that says, you know what, United States, you put your signature, you have obligations, and you have to pay them. And I think most Americans actually agree with us that we do, and Democrats and Republicans should stand up and do that.
Okay, let me ask you this, though. It is a really big deal, and we shouldn't be where we are tonight. Yesterday, former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta said that from his days negotiating with us in the 90s, he really wishes President Obama were more engaged. Today, Senator Clinton, former Secretary of State Clinton, apparently in Atlanta, said something very similar, that her husband and I used to negotiate in the evening, even if we fought all day. Doesn't it strike you as strange that with all of these warnings, the biggest sign of leadership we saw yesterday was the president as a volunteer making sandwiches? I mean, shouldn't the president, isn't this also his legacy, and shouldn't he be more directly engaged in trying to solve this?
I think the reason that the president has said that we don't negotiate and pay ransom over raising the debt limit, paying our bills, and keeping the government open is precisely because he believes that this is really serious. And, you know, I have to tell you, I looked at letters from Secretary Jack Lew from May to August to September, warning that this was going to happen, I mean, since the spring. And so the president knows that he doesn't want, it's not just about his legacy, but it's also about future presidents being held hostage over paying our bills. It's ridiculous.
Highly polished talking points, and I've heard them, and Donna has said them to me before, but I would point out that we have a constitutional responsibility and authority to restrain a president. It's out of bounds on spending, and that's why we are Article 1, and that's why the spending starts in the House, and that's why the tax revenue starts in the House. And furthermore, I continue to hear, well, it's the law, now you must fund it, Obamacare. Well, the debt ceiling is the law. Now we must raise the debt ceiling, even though the current debt ceiling is the law. And by the way, this law we're talking about with Obamacare is not the law. The president has at least twice unconstitutionally, executively amended Obamacare recently, once with the Vitter piece of this language, and the other time when he
at the request of the House. At the request of the House.
Well,
and in terms of that spending.
But also extended the employer mandate for a year, and that's also unconstitutional.
Well, do you want the employer mandate to go back into effect right now?
I want to reassess reassert the Constitution. I don't like the policy.
Right. Well, we can debate the Constitution all we want. But let's talk about spending for a second. The law is that Congress has to raise the debt ceiling to meet its obligations that Congress has obligated the country towards. So it is the law that you have to do your job. And if you want to have a debate about spending, the president is happy to have that debate. I mean, spending is cut almost by 2 percentage points from when the president took office. But that's not the debate we're having. The debate that you wanted to have over shutting down the government and potentially debt ceiling is defunding Obamacare. We're not even talking about that anymore. And you mentioned at the beginning that the current debate wasn't worth it. But was the defunding of Obamacare worth it? You're not getting what you wanted. It's cost the country $20 billion.
This isn't done, of course, and I'm not about to take the position that we should just simply give up and sack up our bats and go home. We are in the middle of this debate, and we have constitutional responsibility and authority. And when a previous Congress should pass, and by the way, by hook, crook, and legislative shenanigan is how Obamacare got passed, and they put automatic spending in there to the tune of $105.5 billion.
Congress
and no
passed
one who was
Obamacare.
elected subsequent to that decision is bound by that decision.
Obamacare was passed by Congress. It was upheld by the Supreme Court. We've had 2 elections on it already. It is the law of the land. And if you're worried about spending, the $20 billion that we've lost because you shut down the government, what could that $20 billion be spent on? It could be spent on paying 16 million retiree Social Security benefits, 2 years of a school lunch program, 3 years of the Women, Infant, Child program. That's money that we've lost.
How long would Obamacare last on $20 billion?
That's what we have lost, though, because Congress shut down the government.
Stephanie,
Congress
you would
didn't
keep
shut
in
down
mind,
the government. The
Congress shut
president
down the
refused to
government.
negotiate, and Congress, the House, several times passed all the money necessary to fund the government.
You don't have to take this from me. Take it from
with the
Republicans
exception
who
of
told you
funding
this
for
was a
Obamacare.
fool's errand.
Stephen, let's look at where we are here, because I want expanded background checks. We have a law now that doesn't have 100% background checks. It would be as though, and 90% of the public agrees with that, a lot of members of Congress. What if we were to organize ourselves and say that we're going to shut down government and not pay our bills because I want expanded background checks? You would say that was ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. But that is exactly what it is that you to do right now. And I have to tell you, for millions of federal workers all across the country, some who are working and aren't being paid, others who are at home, and we passed a bill saying we're going to pay you even though we're keeping you at home. I mean, the ridiculousness is just at a height that I don't understand. The American public doesn't. And the fact is, you could put a clean continuing resolution to fund the government today on the floor, and it would pass the House of Representatives.
But the Speaker won't let that happen.
That's right.
Let me build on the ridiculousness. I want you to look at what Jay Carney said today at the White House as an example of how close to the theater of absurd we are. If we could show Jay's comment. He's asked about negotiating, and he ends up saying, oh, apparently they don't have it queued up. He ends up saying, well, we're not really negotiating. We're sort of talking, but we're not really negotiating. Now, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I believe had the president been directly involved in negotiating, and again, not that he would have accepted the Republican position, but the way you start a negotiation is each side has a position and you talk it through. You participated in trying to help ameliorate part of this because you voted for the clean continuing resolution for D.C., which would keep the the District of Columbia government open. Don't you think it would have been better for Harry Reid to have passed that on to the White House so that could be done and out of the way?
No, I mean, I understand. Look, the D.C. bill is something completely different because it was about how the District of Columbia spends its local money. It doesn't have anything to do with federal money or federal spending. And so I really separate that. We need to open up all of government for all Americans. I've been saying that for a while and passing, one piece of legislation that also impacts others. I have people who live in my district who work at NASA, and they say, what does it mean? I work at NASA, but we work with NOAA. If we open up NASA, but we don't open up NOAA, I can't do my job. And that's how the federal government works, and the impact is really great all across this country. So it doesn't make sense to me to open it up piece at a time. And I have to tell you, if I left it to my colleague, he wouldn't open up the Environmental Protection Agency. He wouldn't open up HHS so that it could deal with health care and other kinds of things.
I do
so,
HHS,
I mean, there's a long list of things that they wouldn't open up. And so what kind of way is that really to run the greatest democracy in the world?
So we need to take a break. But when we come back, I want to ask Congressman King this. Now that the U.S. has been slapped with a warning from a major credit agency that we face a downgrade, what happens if the U.S. really defaults? I mean, we think it's bad now, but it's about to get much worse. Welcome back to Crossfire. We're here with two members of the House, Democrat Donna Edwards and Republican Steve King. We've just learned a major credit agency has warned the U.S. its AAA rating is in jeopardy. This comes just a day away from something that's been utterly unthinkable, a U.S. default. All because Speaker Boehner couldn't figure out how to get something out of the House of Representatives that could pass the Senate and the president could sign. So here we are on the verge of a default. Congressman King, do you think default is a big deal? I've heard you say some mixed things about this, about when we'd hit default, what the president could do, the impact on our country. Bankers, Iowa bankers, I was reading today in the Des Moines Register, think it's catastrophic, that the value of the dollar will drop, our interest rates will climb, that we could fall back into a recession. Why would we even want to get to this point?
Well, this definition of default is something that we should agree to before we go further with how it might affect our economy or how it might affect the global economy. But we have about $18 billion a month is our interest bill, and around $240 billion a month is our revenue stream. About 8% of our revenue is necessary to pay the interest. Now, we can either roll that principal over, or we can then service our debt with what's coming in, and we can take care of some Social Security and Medicare and other expenses.
And not take care of a lot of other things.
So, but default would be if we failed to service our debt. That means the first time we miss an interest payment. And that's not going to happen unless it's by order of the president.
So what do you think the world reaction would be if the United States starts parsing out its bills and figuring out what it can pay and it can't pay, and it starts picking winners and losers because Congress can't get its act together? What do you think the world reaction would be?
First, I don't think October 17th is a hard date. So this is something that would come on gradually. And I've said that at a certain point, we will have to raise the debt ceiling. I've not been one who said we didn't have to do that. And it's a matter of how we manage that cash flow. And if this thing gets tighter and tighter, perhaps then we come to the table and we get the president to actually negotiate, and we can address entitlements.
So you've known since May that we were hitting the debt limit.
We thought it was going to be May, actually, and now it's been moved ahead to October 17th.
The Secretary of Treasury have been going through extraordinary measures to push the date further and further along because Congress wouldn't act, and now we're at the deadline. And you're asking for more time.
Stephanie?
And you're asking for more time. You know, every president, every Secretary of Treasury has given Congress notification. Here's when we're going to hit our debt ceiling. It doesn't matter if we hit it on the 17th, the 18th, or 19th. We shouldn't be in this position. We should act.
You know, I agree with that, and I want to ask this just for a second, Congressman Edwards. But first, I just want to make a brief note. The president's known since May. The president's had a chance to lead since May. At some point, you know, you can't just say, oh, it's all John Boehner's fault. I mean, the fact is, the President of the United States has an obligation. He had 100 things he could do, 100 conversations he could have. He did none of them. The most he did was made partisan speeches attacking Republicans. So let me ask you this. If we do get to this situation, which I hope we won't get to, I don't see any reason we should, would you agree the Constitution requires us to pay interest on the debt? That's the first call on any income. I think you'd have to have Social Security and veterans as part of that initial thing. Would you support Secretary of the Treasury making that kind of judgment? How would, if we actually, I mean, none of us want to get there, but if we did get there, how would you recommend the administration handling the actual day-to-day cash flow crisis?
I think that the mere fact of talking about how the Secretary of the Treasury would prioritize paying our debts would be enough to send not just our economy, but the world's economy into a tailspin, because what it would say to our creditors is you may or may not be on the list. And I think that is beyond irresponsible. And let's look at what we're talking about. We're talking about the possibility of default, which would mean higher interest payments for mortgages, higher interest payments for student loans, higher interest payments for auto loans, jeopardizing savings accounts. People are just started to recover their savings from the last of the Great Recession. They just started to recover their savings, and now we're saying to them, you know what, it's going to take a big hit again. And I think I want to say I don't believe that it can happen, but I have to tell you, listening to my colleagues, including Mr. King, please answer for me if there's a single legitimate economist across the world who believes what you're saying, who believes that we can just kind of stretch this out and pick and choose what bills we're going to pay. Pick and choose what bills we're going to pay. We're saying we're the United States of America, and for the first time in our entire history, we're going to look at the rest of the world and say, here's a list, and we're going to choose this one over that one.
Let me just clarify for 1 second. It really shouldn't happen. You're really opposed to it, but you're not opposed enough to vote with John Boehner to pass something.
Well, here's what I'm opposed to. I'm opposed to what I think is a rump group of Republicans in the Congress holding all of the rest of the nation hostage and saying, in exchange for ransom, in exchange for paying our bills, let's look at what we're saying. We're saying in exchange for paying our bills, we're going to, default. And so I'm not willing to just do anything because it isn't just about, you understand history, you're a historian. It isn't just about this president. It's about the next president, and that next president might be a Republican or a Democrat.
Let me just comment one thing for a second. So I just want to clarify. So you're saying that as terrible as default is, voting yes with John Boehner's worse?
Voting yes under a circumstance where we're saying that we're trading off and picking and choosing winners and losers with the debt ceiling is a huge mistake, because that too I think would send a bad signal to the rest of the financial sector, to the rest of the world, and to people at home who have savings accounts. I'm concerned about those people.
In spite of being called a rump group, which connotes a certain part of a person's anatomy, and I'm not sure what that means, Donna. But
well, consider it a compliment.
I don't object to that part, but it's part of the vernacular of this town. But I think, what if this? What if I accepted your premise? What if I accepted your premise? What if we accepted the idea that this Congress, this elected 113th Congress, has a duty and an obligation to fund everything that's been passed by previous Congresses and also raise the debt ceiling whenever we hit the top of that? If you go on like that and you have the most leftist president we've ever had in history and we see trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, at what point then do we look back in history and say, those guys and gals failed us? They should have held the line. They should have been willing to face the president shutting the government down, and they should have made an issue about the debt ceiling so that we could reform entitlement.
Well,
that's really the fact.
That's an interesting question, because most Congresses deal with it by working through a budget process, passing legislation to reduce spending, to not listen to only the hardliners. And I'm sorry, I don't mean this as an insult, but you're a hardliner in the Republican Congress. And listening, you went to that dinner last night, which, it's your right to do. You can go have dinner with whoever you want. But reports today, there was a secret dinner with Ted Cruz, and you were plotting your strategy to hold the line, on keeping the government shut down so that you can defund Obamacare. Now, we're more than 2 weeks into this. Have you learned nothing? I mean, what have you gained? What have you gained?
And I want to move the debt ceiling, and I want to do it prudently. And I offered Donna this proposal the last time we had this conversation. You were at the table, Stephanie. And it's this. Why don't we then if you love Obamacare so much, just take it all. We'll give you all of it, minus the waivers, minus the unconstitutional changes, all of that, and sunset Obamacare then in January 15th of 2015, and then let's have an election in November of 14 and decide whether we really want Obamacare or not.
Otherwise, because we had an election in November 2012, and we had an election in 2008 over health care. We cannot talk about whether we reopen government or not and whether we pay our bills because you don't like
you won't negotiate, Donna.
If you don't like the health care law, win a presidential election. That's
don't you want all of Obamacare?
Just for a second. Both of you stay here. Next, we ceasefire. Given this, it'll be interesting to see if there's anything you two can agree on. We also want you to weigh in on today's fireback question. If Congress funds the government for 3 months, do you think there will be another shutdown in January? Tweet yes or no using hashtag Crossfire. We'll have the results after the break. Boehner tries to write another bill, or that the whole thing collapses and they simply move the Senate bill?
It looks to me like now they're probably going to end up moving the Senate bill because there really isn't any room to write something new. They've narrowed it down to the point where they perhaps have hit the wall tonight, unless they're more creative than I am. We shall see.
So from your standpoint, moving the Senate bill, say tomorrow, assuming by then there is a Senate bill, would be something you could support?
I think so. Open the government, lift the debt ceiling, pay our bills, get people back to work.
So do you think that Speaker Boehner is going to allow this to pass with Democratic votes, or is he still going to demand that this be a Republican bill? Is he going to be a leader, or is he going to be a follower?
That is a tough call. And this crunch time is getting down here to where the Hastert rule is sitting out in the middle of the table. And I don't know which way that will go. But I'm hoping that Donna will come and support the Langford bill. You sign a discharge petition on that, and that would be a solution that I think that we could look to that would be favorable to what we're looking at right now.
Okay. Well, you're going to have the Senate bill before for you, it looks like. So are you going to vote for the Senate bill?
Unlikely.
Well, we're going to need your
I'm
vote,
prepared to vote for a bipartisan bill. We have enough Democrats. We need just a few Republicans to get the government going
So a
again.
bipartisan bill out of the Senate and hopefully a bipartisan bill without Boehner in the House.
Oh, it would take a bipartisan vote in the House
It has to.
pass it.
Since we were all about a partisan bill in the first place, the Obamacare bill.
We've committed
It's quite
186 votes among Democrats to pass a clean funding bill and a clean debt ceiling.
Well,
Do you support Langford if we bring it to the floor, Donna?
I don't even know what the Langford bill is. What I know is I've signed a discharge petition for
That's a clean CR for 120 days.
No, we
with
don't.
the 1%
Not 120
cut over
days.
each 90
we need
days.
to deal with this and not keep coming back and putting the American people through shock trauma because we can't get our act together.
I think, ironically, I think the Langford bill may actually be a longer debt ceiling than the one that's
It is. It actually
the one
is.
that's going to be in the Senate.
What does it do on Obamacare?
Doesn't address it.
Well, how
But
would
it
you,
does
we're going to go
ratchet
back in a
down
second.
beyond
I think
sequestration.
this vote on our fireback. What's your bet? Any more government shutdowns this cycle, or is this over?
Well,
No,
what do you vote for?
If it's over, it's over. It's not coming
When they
back.
come back in January.
I don't think it comes back.
I hope not. I mean, I would hope that people would have learned the lesson of this and just not do it again.
And any reason to be
I mean,
you agree with that?
it's his call.
I think
Is
that
this your ceasefire?
there's been a lot of political capital investment put in this thing, and when it's time to take the hill, you take the hill or you die on it, and that's about where I'm standing right now. Let's take the hill.
So
but
what
to
you're
rally the
saying-
troops again after this is over, after all of these days and all of these months of ginning up to this thing, will be very hard for anybody to do.
Okay. So, but let me just interpret what you're saying. So if we reopen the government for a short period of time and then have this debate again, you're still going to push for the government to either be funded with a defunded of Obamacare or shut down the government until you get your way.
I'm not about shutting down the government. That, again, was the president's decision and Harry Reid's decision. But I am about putting an end to Obamacare some way eventually.
I know you've
because
tried 42
America can
times
never
and it
reach
hasn't
destiny
worked.
without.
One more
Give it up
time.
alreght.
Okay. Thanks to Representative Donna Edwards and Steve King. Thanks for watching. From the left, I'm Stephanie Cutter.
From the right, I'm Newt Gingrich. Join